Welcome to the Attract Your Ideal Clients podcast. This show is for entrepreneurs who sell their expertise, including trainers, consultants, and coaches looking for real-world, actionable marketing advice to help them identify their competitive strengths, find and fix the marketing bottlenecks that are holding them back, and confidently make the right marketing decisions for their unique business. In today's episode, we're exploring ways to strengthen your self-awareness and create a business model that's aligned with your zone of genius. Joining me today is Humaira Akhter from HA Consulting. If you enjoy the show, I hope you'll consider subscribing and leaving a review. Here we go. So to start us out, can you just briefly share who you are, what you do, types of problems you solve, types of people you work with?
Well, thank you, Marcus, for having me, first of all. And first of all, I will say that my name is Humaira. Most people know me by Myra. I prefer that name because it's shorter and sweet to remember. Um, and I live in Maryland. I have two twin boys. Everybody I talk to, when I mention about twin boys, they're like, "Oh, how's that?" It's it's handful, but you know what? It's given me so much perspective in life in terms of being a mother, being an entrepreneur, and all that I wouldn't have it any other way. And so that's my first and foremost identity. The second thing is what I've been doing in the last few years is really been passionate about helping seasoned solopreneurs defining their zone of genius so they can create the most aligned offer. That's not just, because most people I run into, they're trying to scale too fast. They're scaling before even the foundations are in place. So my goal is to help build that awareness, that self-awareness within them before they even create this business model that is meant for them. So that's been the work in the last few years. I've pivoted a couple of times in my career, actually more than a couple of times. But each pivot has taught me that no amount of money, no amount of clients is going to be worth sacrificing your health, sacrificing your personal values, and sacrificing your relationships that matter. So that has become the foundation of my work, right? And uh, my gut's been telling me lately that the world is shifting. And the way I see it is that we're living in this sort of environment, this universe where, you have the tech, the AI, and you have all sorts of you know, uh, marketing tactics, technology that's coming out. People used to do lead magnets. People used to do work, webinars, these long sales pitchy webinars. Those are gone. Um, People are not downloading, at least to my knowledge, you know, documents after documents, lead magnets to show them how to do certain things. I'm not saying that that doesn't still exist, it does. But to me, what's been lost is the wisdom and the inner voice of who we are as human being, as individuals. And everybody's trying to wrestle with that, and they're trying to find meaning through their work. And I think that has both the dark and the lightness that brings out the best in people and brings out the worst in people. And we're in this complex environment to figure that out what that is. So sorry for that long intro,
No,
but
no,
that's the best I can put it.
that was great. That was great. It was almost like we could stop right there. I think people need to just think about it. No, so
Right.
so it's one thing that really popped out more than anything else was this idea of, the zone of genius, but specifically the self-awareness. And to your point about lead magnets and everything, these are tactics, right? I mean, they have their place, It's essentially about how you sharing value in content. Now that might look a little different today than it
Correct.
did 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago,
Right.
but the first principles remain in the sense of if you can provide value, then you're building relationships with people, even people you haven't met, and you're starting to create those
Correct.
conversations, right? But separated from tactics, I like how you brought up with everything going on with AI and technology and everything. I sense it too, and the way I think about it is it's almost like this very like chaotic game of like which line at the grocery store is shorter, right? So it's like rather than saying I'm here,
Right.
my intention is to like get to that place that I'm looking at. It's this kind of panicky feeling where it's the fear of missing out maybe, right? It's always my choice right now isn't the right choice. It must not be the right choice because it's my choice and it's my gut that told me to do this, which obviously can't be true. So it must be because what this person tells me to do, and that line over there is better. It's not a great analogy because we're not talking about supermarkets, but it's that kind of thing where it's like
Yeah.
instead of trusting yourself to know,
Right.
this is what I'm good at, this is what I care about. I like that you brought up values because I think values is a critical piece to this. That you know, based on my values, these are the problems I like solving. These are
Right.
these are the types of people I like working with. And I think we're inundated with so many contrary opinions by
Right.
marketers like myself too, and even sometimes from me. There could be contrary
Yeah,
opinions coming out of my face.
absolutely. And I was saying that to a friend that, I am no exception to this rule because subconsciously we make those choices and it's hard to filter out every second of the moment, right? But just talking about it right now makes you even more aware, right? And you might not go back to your desk and send out that 30% off email. You might think a little bit before you hit send, right? Like, who is this serving to? Am I really, is it really going to yield to something for both parties, not just you, but for both parties, right? And I'll tell you, I haven't done any promotion. Thanksgiving, Christmas holiday, I haven't done anything. Now, some people might hear and like, well, that's your loss. Like you could have, pushed a little harder till the end of the year, right? But I, knowing me, knowing who I am, it just, I just know that I will burn out that
Mm,
way.
yeah.
For me,
Well,
you know what I mean?
yeah, I do because I'm going through the same thing right now. I was just sharing with you about, we're moving in a few days, and we're also like hit the pause button, right, on my own stuff because I
Right,
know it's like I can't handle all this.
right.
And but let's take a step back. Let's talk, the self-awareness aspect to it, and it really comes down to focus, right? We only have so much time and energy to work with, only so much money.
Right.
If you're self-employed, you got a runway to work with, unless you're, just independently wealthy, which good for you. But it's
Thanks, Dad.
yeah, thanks, Dad, right? Well, could be mom too. You don't know.
It
It
could
could have
be
been
mom.
mom.
Yeah, okay.
Uh,
All right, I take that back. Thanks, Mom,
thanks,
for leaving all
mom.
that stash for
That's
me.
right. Uh, so a lot of this comes down to difficulty in focusing, right? And it's not
Yes,
an ADHD thing necessarily, although it could be, but it's like it's more about like, what if I make the wrong choice? And
correct.
the
Right.
the nature of building a business is that you're going to be wrong a lot more than you're right. You're going to try things
Yeah,
that are not going to work right away, even though you think in your
that
head
rings
it's
true.
perfect, right? So what
Hmm.
happens is, and I'm saying this from personal experience. I'm not saying this like theoretically. I'm talking about I struggled for decades with this, where you have an idea that might be really close to as authentic expression of your values and virtues and strengths as it ever would be. You have an idea of a problem you want to solve that really lights you up, a service or
Right.
product you want to create that really lights you up, type of client that you want to work with because for whatever reason you just have experience doing it or you've envisioned them, whatever it is, the kind of work you want to do just lights you up. And you go out into the world and you want to share that with people and get clients and start getting paid and live the great life and all that wonderful stuff that we all want. And inevitably, unless you're very lucky or very experienced or both, the first couple of things you try, no, it's like, oh, what do you mean LinkedIn posting didn't work in the first 3 weeks, right? Oh my God, like, what do you mean? I went to three
Right.
networking events and I didn't get any clients. Like, seriously, this is what I went through, and this is what a lot of people go through. So it's easy to start second guessing yourself, right? It's easy to start thinking, well, this must be the wrong approach, right? Oh, I see this person over there. They're doing this type of coaching or they're doing this kind of thing and they're successful. Maybe I should go do that. And that's where it starts unraveling. And it doesn't mean you can't look at other people for inspiration and ideas. Please do that. But from my experience, that's what happened to me, where I didn't have the self-awareness to be really aligned with those important integral truths about myself until much later in my life. But I had this inspiration for something, but it was fragile. It was so fragile. And the second, even in my own head, if I saw it not working, I would quit. That's how bad it was. I'd have the words in my head. My self-talk was, quote, "This won't work." Like, so I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but like that's kind of how I see the kind of genesis of this struggle for people.
I relate so hard on that because the thing is, I've had those periods of moment where I wanted to change my entire copy because I'm like, well, I I'm not promising those six figures. I'm not promising those, those big numbers. So how can they trust me or believe me? But here's my thing is like, why am I promising something that is just a figurative number? And it doesn't dictate, it doesn't really define nor who they are or the success of the business. Just because you made six figure this season doesn't mean that that will define your entire business
Might not be the thing that matters to you. Six
or
figures
that
can matter. It's very
right.
that you know what I mean? That's not like that's
Yeah,
the holy grail of business is six figures.
right. And the challenge is that there's a balance that, you know, we have as a business owners, we have to be realistic about the numbers. And I hear that all the time. Like, you don't, if you don't track, you don't know what's going on. And I fully support that. But then I've also went through periods where I've done all the tracking and everything, and I've got immersed into this idea of like, okay, I call them the impatient seekers. The impatient seeker
What are
who
those?
is who are constantly who are constantly seeking for something, and it's never enough. It's never enough, no matter how much you make, no matter how much you do, no matter how much you put in. So this time that has taught me was that how much time you're spending between enough and not having enough.
Yeah. Yeah, again, this is something I can relate to very much. I went too far in the other direction a few years ago, right? So about 10 years ago, I think I mentioned to you before we hit record, I was, learning meditation, mindfulness, that self-awareness component that I was lacking, right? Really lacking. I wasn't like a bad person, but I didn't have the ability to have the perspective and be able the distance between the reaction and the int and the trigger. And I got really into like classic yoga. I got really into Bhagavad Gita. I got really into these modalities of these philosophies about like non-attachment above all. That all, that the source of suffering or the root cause of suffering is desire, right? And struggled for years trying to align that with my values. Speaking of values, right? Because one of my values is achievement. Tricky,
Wow.
right?
Yeah,
Right? So
I
it's
can see
like,
that.
yeah,
Oh,
so I'm trying
okay.
to find validation in the texts about why it's okay to be an entrepreneur, you know? You know what I'm
Oof.
saying? Yeah,
Yeah.
householders. Oh, that's interesting, whatever, right? So the point is that it's the impatient part of it that I realized was the thing that I needed to get a handle on. It wasn't the seeking because I've gotten to a point now where I feel like I found the right balance for me in the sense of understanding that the self-awareness serves your values, not it's not always about like if you think about somebody else's values, you think about what somebody else cares about. You brought up the six figures before, right?
Right.
For some people, that's the holy grail. That's all that matters, right? For some people, it's
Yes.
constantly scaling and building
Chasing
and
and
chasing,
right.
whatever, showing
Right.
wealth, whatever. For some people, it's just, I don't want to have to work for somebody else. And if I can make 50 grand a year doing it, great.
I'm
Awesome.
happy.
I'm
Yeah.
happy. I want to be able to
Right.
spend time with my family. I want to travel, whatever it is. I could read books about freeing yourself to be a digital nomad so you could travel. I'm like, ugh, I don't want to spend 12 months, 11 months of the year traveling. That's like, doesn't, so different.
Sounds painful.
It sounds like his job, right? Like that's the last thing I want to do.
Right.
So, I don't even travel for the weekend at Christmas. So, so one of the things I'm hearing and kind of filtering through my experience is like being mindful that the one definition of success, not only for ourselves, but also for our clients, there is no one definition. So when you're actually
No.
creating content or copy, when you're saying you're changing the copy to be more like, hey, I crushed it and I made six for whatever, this person made this much money, that doesn't necessarily mean that, or I should say that's not necessarily the metric that everybody cares about. And where it might really be the sweet spot, that zone of genius, is saying, what do I care about? What do I think is success that's valid for me in a deep level? And who would be attracted to that? How can I
Correct.
find the people who would be like really go, oh, that's somebody I can relate to?
Yeah. One thing I learned recently, and I I can't remember the name. I apologize, but and it when she said that, I was like, this is the heart of my work that I couldn't really articulate for quite some time, is that your zone of genius, think of it as your head, which is factual. There's some facts about you that are always true. You certain height, you have a certain eye color, you have a certain type of, I don't know, um, um, trait. Those are not, sorry, not trait, but where you live and how many years, that kind of, those are facts, right? Those are factual truth. And then there's the emotional truth of how you feel about certain things when you react, when you respond to something. Those are emotional. And then you have the gut. Your gut actually, it's surprisingly very, very connected, right? But most of the time, our head, heart, and gut is not aligned. So we're not speaking the truth. There's no
You're all
truth.
head, or we're all gut, or we're all
Yes,
feeling, or we're all anything else,
yes.
and then we're running around in circles.
And when you can get those three things, when you talk to somebody, you're telling all those three things, your head, heart, and gut, it's truth. And I hope that you felt that when I said that in the beginning of my intro, is that my truth, there are truths that people have. It's not usually unraveled or it's not really peeled off as layers because they're hidden in so many forms. We're either too close to it or we're just autopiloting, you know, autopiloting or subconsciously we're just drawing things from what's around us. Oh, my coach told me, I should do more of this, so I do that, you know, or, and I'm not saying they're not right or wrong. They could be very right and it works. Something works and it's like, oh my God, you're a genius. You told me to do that and it
I hear
worked.
that all the time. No, I'm just kidding.
Holy
I'm
moly,
just
it
kidding.
worked.
Yeah. Well, and that comes into now the trusting yourself and look, entrepreneurship, in my opinion, building a business is as creative as an endeavor as any kind of artistic career,
Oh,
right? We're
yes.
talking about self-expression, and I think there's a we lose something when we think it's just a color by numbers, paint by numbers approach, where we're now going to replace our boss and provide, give ourselves this crushing it lifestyle by just doing the 10 steps that this person on LinkedIn said you should do to guarantee blah, 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 right? It's like, look, you're creating something from nothing. You're creating,
You're
you're
testing so
testing,
many different
you're
things.
you're
Yeah.
operating as all of us are, as whether you have a full-time job or not. We're all operating in changing conditions and uncertain conditions, constant flux, right?
Right.
And the only anchor you have is your self, capital S self, right? And that self, capital L self can be capital
Oof.
S, I should say, is
Right.
is the head, heart, and gut, right?
Right.
There's other versions of it. There's just the Atma, whatever you want to do. You can get
Yeah.
super spiritual about it, whatever it is. But it's not what somebody says on LinkedIn that you should do. That's definitely not the self, capital S, right? And if you don't have a sense of what that is, that doesn't mean it has to be one thing either. It can
Right.
be, you could
Right.
serve multiple types of clients. You can have different things that you're interested in. That's great. But ultimately, if you don't have a sense of that, you're going to constantly be chasing whatever's the latest trend, whatever the latest hot thing. Look at how many AI experts suddenly showed up 3 months after ChatGPT launched version 3 or whatever it was. All of a sudden, I'm seeing all these amazing AI experts. Really? Like all of a sudden, there's thousands of people just developed deep expertise about a technology that even the people that built it don't truly understand how it works. No, it's because this is the hot trend. And I look at that and go, well, if you're really interested in AI and it just clicks for you and you love it and you love talking about it and learning, great. I'm going to guess that the vast majority of people that are in that space are
They're
not,
jumping on a trend.
right?
Yes.
Same goes for mindfulness. The same goes. How many mindfulness coaches
Oh,
are
God
there
forbid.
that
I don't need.
have no sense of any of the history of any of it? Like they're just like they did a course, right? So again, the point is like if this isn't coming from something really kind of authentic within you,
Yes.
sincerely within you, you're going to have a hard time figuring out how to navigate this adventure, but also you're probably going to be pretty miserable because you're going to be building a job doing something that you're really not that into.
I thank you for saying that. I love what you said about you doing the thing. Is it because of the influence of whatever it's out there, or is it the influence of yourself, yourself uh driven? And I think that's a tricky situation for a lot of people because you are here, you have the pressure of performing in your business, right? Like you have this financial pressure or whatever the pressure is. And I had this conversation not too long ago. Like we're trying to prove it not just to other people, like to our family and friends, and we're trying to prove it to ourselves that I could do this, you know? Look, I'm worthy of something. And that worthiness, it becomes it's deep. It's like it stems from our childhood, wanting to be liked, wanting to be loved, wanting to be accepted, you know wanting to belong.
And the danger of this, and again, I'm speaking from personal experience, having struggled with this for a long time, is if you're seeking other people's validation through your business, you're going to struggle because this any whatever you're doing, you're going to have a lot more people that don't need or don't want what you do at this moment than will want or need what you do at this moment. Just the reality of it. If you do any kind of marketing, if you do any kind of outreach, prospecting, going to networking meetings, whatever it is, the majority of people you talk to are not going to need what you do. And if you're going out there with this idea that my value as a
Hmm.
person through this work is determined by the reaction of every single person I speak to, my um, experience was
Hmm.
devastating because my self-esteem was always on the line. Every call I
Mm.
made, it was always make or break, life or death. I'm either good enough or I'm not good enough.
If somebody turned you down, or
Yeah,
if you got rejected.
or even the
Yeah.
thought of it. the thought this person won't need, again, it was a different version of this won't work. I had this won't work. And then I had, quote, this person won't need what I have. Why would they need what I have? Like, we're talking about some therapy stuff here, you know?
Let me ask you a question about
Yeah,
this. Did you realize after a certain period of doing that, is that okay? I understand the I understand the value I have, and it's not meant for everybody. It's meant for just a few specific, maybe just a small group of people. And I'm okay with that. And if that makes me, I don't know, 100K a year, I'm good. Let's roll with that. Did you have any of that kind of like uh inflection point in your life or in your business?
I did for sure. It was not an intellectual inflection point at first.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't convincing myself I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me, and you know, and not everybody will need what I have. All those things are true. As far, not the good enough, smart enough, and people like me part, but you know what I'm saying. That not everybody will need what you have. But it for me, this was just my own path, right? It was a deconstruction of the entire idea of who I was to begin with, right? So, not to get too deep in the weeds, but basically, I had just a foundation of just pessimism, very low self-regard, trying to prove myself, very frustrated of why I wasn't succeeding at the level that I wanted to. This kind of tension
Why
between
why do you think that was stemming from? Where do you think that was
oh,
stemming
all
from?
kids, all childhood stuff, all yeah, fun for sure, for sure.
Right.
And that's why,
Yeah.
10 years ago, this is now, the 2015, when I started learning about mindfulness and meditation, all that. Basically, I stripped myself down to as close to zero as Gandhi would say, take yourself down to zero as possible, realizing that I didn't want to stay there. I don't want to be a
Yeah.
non-entity on this
Yeah.
planet, right? But
Right.
I was at that, working to get rid of before
Mm-hmm.
adding to, right? So there was a lot of just, we could just take it very, technically, it was just storytelling. It was what are the stories I'm telling myself based on my experience, right?
Mm.
And my habits
That's
were
huge.
it was huge. For me, this is like crazy
Yeah.
now. So like, the stories of, you're not, all the you're not good enough, nobody loves you, all that stuff. Those were, finally realizing through that mindfulness practice, through yoga and through meditation and all that, and being able to see it for what it is, being able to understand the difference between who we are as, and I'll get woo-woo for a second, but just this kind of innate
I love
consciousness,
woo.
right? Yeah,
Yes.
just realizing like who I really am that has never changed is I am this awareness of these things. And I
Yes.
can be aware of these stories and realize, oh, I can actually unpack them and understand where they came from. Long story short, because this will be a much longer episode if I get it too into the weeds with this. But long story short, fast forward a few years
Okay.
and being able to actually have my hands on the levers of those inputs. So I'll give you a practical example.
Okay.
If I have a negative story pop in my head about, let's say, even a podcast episode, like I'm
Right.
dealing, I have a cold right now. I had yesterday I woke up and I didn't feel good. So I'm not at my best, right? And my head might go, oh, I'm tired. I just want to
Maybe you should just cancel or
yeah, just
yeah.
cancel on her. She won't care. You won't care, right? No, I'm just teasing. But then it's almost like I change the channel and there's a different version of that. It's like seeing the positive, seeing the success, seeing the different multiple paths to success. Hey, I don't need to be whatever. I could just be present, just be in whatever. I'm simplifying it too much, but
Plus,
ultimately
I'm very awesome to talk
you
to.
were so awesome to talk to. Like, why would I not want to do this, right? I'd have to be on my deathbed to not want to have this conversation. But it's just having that ability to make that choice. I never had
Right.
that prior 10 years ago. So now bringing it back to the whole marketing thing, the whole like understanding yourself so you could build a business. For me, I needed to understand that stuff at a personal level before I could ever really start succeeding at a financial level and entrepreneurial level, because the outside is not going to fix it. Like I tried the whole chasing, I'm going to build this great business and then I'll feel great about myself. Well, the irony is that when you get on a call with a client or a potential client, they can smell it.
They can sense it. Oh,
Oh,
oh, 100%.
I'm like that kid in middle school asking the girl out to the dance and getting rejected all over again. They can smell it, right? If all you're seeing is how they won't need you, it's coming out in ways you're not even aware of. You're not even you're not even aware of ways to actually make the deal happen or help more people or create more value because your brain isn't even letting you see it. You're just stuck in blind spots, right? And worse, if all you do is expect failure or struggle or this person won't want it, your brain is going to go, fine, I'll make that happen. And guess what? It does. And then you go, yeah, this is, I guess, the way it is for me. So all this is tied to entrepreneurship in the sense that if you're going into a situation with a client or building a business so that you can feel better about yourself, but people will need you, it might be something that's much harder than it should be. And even if you have this stuff dialed in, it's still a challenge to build a business. It's never easy.
Sure.
But if you're starting out from a place of neediness and you want to charge 10 grand for a coaching package or you want
Oh,
to
oh
charge
God.
$50,000 for copywriting or whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
Like
right.
you might hit some walls.
Let me ask you another question. Why do you think so many people, especially, and maybe not so much the beginners, because I'm seeing a lot more people that are in the 2 year mark, maybe in the less than 3 year business mark, starting to realize, okay, maybe I should invest in my foundations and get clear, get really clear on who I am, right? But why do you think so many people want to skip the self-awareness and just wanting to get to the weeds of the doing things? I'm curious to hear your thoughts because I run into this issue where they understand, they value this, but it's like, okay, well, I still want to get my offer out there, you know.
Yeah, I think well, maybe two aspects to this, whether they even know it's a option anyway.
It's an right.
I learned this by reading books. I mean, learned this by not, I don't want to say accident, but by circumstance of listened to Michael Singer on a podcast 10 years ago, and he was the author of The Untethered Soul, which got me into ideas about yoga, and that led to something else, and then all these other things. So, it wasn't, I didn't know. I mean, I'd been reading books about performance and mental performance and mindset and all that stuff for a
Mm,
long time. Nothing was really making any difference for me, unfortunately. So there's that part.
mm,
When people do know it's an option, I think the foundation for me and my theory about the ultimate foundation for anybody is metacognitive awareness. And what that is basically, are you aware that you're aware?
mm.
It is a spiritual based thing. If we don't, it's basically, and I don't want to overstate this and make it sound like really kind of arrogant, but it is an awakening kind of thing. It's a consciousness thing. If we don't have that awakened moment of where
Mm.
we recognize the difference between who we are as just consciousness, and we can awareness versus the feelings, the thoughts, the things that we're identified with. You can't force that on somebody. You can't teach that to somebody on a coaching call. Um,
So
you
it's an experience somebody has to go through in order to.
yeah. Sam Harris puts it really well. He says, he has this great book called Waking Up. And for anybody that Sam Harris is relatively controversial, unfortunately, because his points of view on certain political issues have been distorted
Mhm.
and taken out of context. But he does speak a lot and has written a lot about consciousness, right? He comes from a Buddhist kind of tradition, right? As far as his training, and he talks about it's like you know the example of if you're looking at a pane of glass outside and you're standing in your kitchen, you can either focus on the outside or you can focus on the pane of glass where you're seeing your reflection, right? Either way, it depends on your focus, where you're focusing your gaze, whether you're relaxing it or not. You
Mm.
can't teach somebody to do that, But once you see it, you can't unsee it,
Unsee it.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's a good analogy because ultimately it's recognizing a perspective that you might not have ever experienced, that somebody could I could be talking about this and it sounds like complete nonsense to somebody who's never experienced it. But once you've experienced it, of just being aware, like who is this person having the thoughts? Who is the person that's aware of this? Oh, that's weird. Like I'm actually experiencing something that I thought was me. It's look, it's years of
Wow.
work to get into that. So I don't want to,
Yeah.
like I'm trying to reduce it down to some,
Right.
easy thing. But for me personally, that's the thing that had to change.
Hmm.
I have a theory that that's ultimately the foundation of any of this because if you're running around reacting to every impulse, if you're reacting to every trigger, if you're constantly reacting, you said before about being on autopilot, that's the
Hmm.
difference.
Hmm.
So when you actually have a moment where you can choose because you're observing things as opposed to being lost in them, now all this other stuff comes with it potentially. Now you can have that self-awareness where you can start being aware of maybe not great stories, not great habits, not great narratives that you're telling yourself about yourself. But until you have that, it's just like bouncing from one
One thing to
better
next.
version to
Right.
another. And then the person that tells you this, oh, that feels good. But it's never really stable. It's never built on anything that just never changes. It's always
We
based on,
okay. We talked about, sorry to cut you off, but we talked about this earlier when when we connected, is that people switching niches so often because, oh, okay, I don't like work that. Okay, maybe I should work with this. Oh no, wait, I work with this person and this industry and this thing. And so I find that example, what you just said, moving from one thing to next, I see that. And a part of the reason why I did create my program was because of that. Because one, I struggled myself enough with that. Two, I've seen enough struggled people deal with that. Do you find in your work where, like, I see that forcing a niche doesn't work really well either? It's not about forcing for the sake of, because you see something like, oh yeah, I can make a killing in this niche, so go with that niche. But I hate myself in the process.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if I see that as often as I see the what might be considered the opposite of not picking a niche at all, of just
Right.
being like
That's
the
true.
leadership consultant, you know,
Right.
end of, full stop, period, right? So
Right.
in a world with hundreds of thousands of leadership experts, there are another leadership expert that hasn't really thought through this at all. So I think the greater problem is not picking the wrong niche, because at least that's a direction, a step in a better direction where you're trying to focus. Maybe it's for the wrong reasons. And I don't maybe necessarily know that because
Sure.
I don't do that
Sure.
kind of deep work with people, right?
Right.
But it's the kind of not putting the thought into it at all, right? So
Yeah.
you think about
Right.
why are you it's all like anything in life that you're trying to create from nothing, whether it's art, whether it's a business, whether it's a relationship, the quality of your relationships matter compared to this, right?
Mm.
It's no
Mm.
coincidence the quality of my relationships have gotten infinitely better in the last 10 years than
Mm.
they were before. That's not a
Sure.
coincidence. It doesn't mean that I do everything right. Heck no, right? But it just means that because
It's a
I'm
lot
able to
better.
make
Yeah.
choices that I wasn't
Right.
able to make before, right?
Sure.
So all these things, when we talk about, we can go on LinkedIn and we can scroll down and see lots of advice that might be great advice, right? Maybe some of it's not great, but let's just assume that in some context, every piece of advice you might look on LinkedIn or YouTube about business works in some context, right? It's applicable to
Oof.
some situation.
Yes.
It might have just been that person's situation and they're thinking it's going to help everybody. But it's not, there's no such thing as bad advice in that sense, right? If
Right.
it's true in one context, the tricky thing is that if you don't have any foundation in being able to have your own finger on the pulse of what drives you, your values, which is something that I
really kind of thinking about much more recently about, oh, if I'm not this or that, then what am I, right?
Yeah.
And there's a guy named Ryan Bush that just writes these two amazing books that I love so much. One is Become Who You Are. That's the more recent one. The other one is Designing the Mind. Saying it's Designing the Mind. Like just
Oof.
like took all that foundation of metacognitive awareness, of
Right.
that consciousness, and now layered on top of it, like, oh, yes, this is the thing that is as close to me as I can codify it without it being about results, without it being about I'm good because this person
That's
you're
it.
not, right?
That's it.
But again,
There's this energetic pull that
you kind of know.
automatically you're drawn to it, and whether you're getting paid or not, you would still do it. You would still,
And have been for a long time. There's a lot of stuff I do that I don't get paid for. This podcast being one of them, right? Like I don't get paid for this. Like,
yes,
not in the traditional way, right?
yes,
You do a podcast, you don't get paid for it. At least I don't
no,
know if you do, right? So it's like there's a lot of stuff we're
right,
not going to get compensated in the moment for. But if we're doing it with a sense of purpose and like authentic passion and whatever buzzwords you want to throw around, like,
yeah,
is that ever a waste of time? No.
no,
I've gotten gigs from my podcast before. I've gotten clients from it. I've got like of course stuff comes back.
right, yeah. And so that, to me, that connection to yourself, to your genius, is what I think is what keeps people going, and not having to deteriorate, and you know what I mean, not having to like go back and forth and suffering between, like, okay, if I don't niche down in this way, then, but it's more of an intentional decision. Like, no, this path speaks to me, this path aligns to me. I could see myself doing this for quite a long time, for quite a bit of time, not like a month and just quit, you know, or even 6 months and quit. And that's where I think that, I don't know about you, but I find that, not that I struggle to find that type of people, but I struggle to make people, and like you said, I think you said that, like, you cannot teach that. You cannot teach self-awareness. You cannot make people understand something unless they're going through it. And I'm always amazed by it, like, as when people go through my stuff and content or program, that, like, that's the one thing I needed the most, was self-awareness. But you can't, in the marketing terms, there's always this idea of like need versus want, right? People want a sexy skinny body. Nobody wants to hear that they have to eat more protein
Yeah.
or get more
They don't want to
sleep.
do the stuff to get
They
there.
want to do the stuff, man. So how do you, as a marketer, where do you fall? Like, how do you balance that between, like, okay, yeah, like the most obvious stuff that we talked about, like, are you kidding me? You don't know this? Like, this is basic. How do you not know the basics?
Well, and it's interesting. We all have our zones of genius, right? And what I think is kind of marketing 101 stuff for somebody who's not into marketing is not necessarily how they think, but they're brilliant at something else. My wife is a nurse, right? I wouldn't be able to do her job. She works in a nursing
Right.
home. I'd be like in the corner, just like, rocking back and forth in a fetal position after 3 hours.
You might be
So
changing the wrong gown.
right. Oh, please. They'd be admitting me into a room. No, we all have the things that they're strong at, right? That come
Right.
relatively natural to us, and then we still have to learn new or learn new concepts and improve and build our expertise.
Right.
I wanted to go back to something we were saying about, you can't force that awareness or that that awakening moment. And I don't like using that language. I think it's kind of overdone, but I can't
Yeah.
express it any other way. There's a moment of just you're just oh, one thing I really love about coaching as a modality when it's done well, in my opinion,
Hmm.
is when I aspire to this when I do a coaching or advising session with somebody, even if it's part of a traditional marketing
Mm-hmm.
engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's about, to me, about creating the space for people to see new solutions and possibilities.
Mm.
So what does that mean? Okay, so it's like if I get on a call with somebody and I'm gonna say, hey, after 5 minutes of getting to know them, I'm gonna tell you the 7 steps to be able to do this. You got a pen? Hang out. Here, I'm gonna tell you. Number one, do this. Number two, do that. Well, first of all, they can get that from a blog post. They don't need that from me. All right. Secondly, that's not in my opinion, the real value of these kinds of conversations. The real value is, while I can't, as an advisor, force somebody to have an awakening moment. I'm like the guru, right? I'm going to touch you on the forehead, and suddenly all of space and time is going to unravel. You know, that's silly. But what I can do is through creating space for whoever, to be able to work through the things that you're challenged with, to hear yourself say it out loud, to actually, for maybe the first time in your life, have
Mm.
somebody truly listen to you and actually be interested in what you're saying. Like all these things, what happens in these kinds of conversations, anybody that's listening, that's a coach that has done this for any length of time, they have these moments where they look off and they go, huh. And that's when you just shut up, right? And you just let them have that
Let them
moment.
realize. Yeah.
That is an awakening moment in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's maybe not,
Oh,
it's not maybe
right.
in a grand scheme Buddha version of it, but it's like for a moment they're seeing a perspective on something that they never recognized before. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the best thing I can do as a marketing advisor in that role is to
And
create that
unfortunately,
space.
you can't find that on a book or a lead magnet either.
Well, no, and
You
the
know?
value. I mean, you don't see all of them behind me now, but and we're about to move, so I scaled back. My books they're all in boxes, but I love books. I love books about this stuff. There is a point where you can read a book, and it can, for me, it has sparked those moments. A lead magnet, if it's done well, if it's ripped off of ChatGPT and it's just a summary of what it's finding on the internet, maybe not so much. But if somebody's coming to something with deep knowledge and experience and they're really thinking about who I am as the reader, and they're gonna, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I told you about the one book that totally changed my life in one direction, the Michael Singer stuff, right? I think books can absolutely do that. Everybody's a little different though. Not everybody wants to sit there and read, the hundreds of books that gets you finally to the place where
Right.
then now you have to read another 30. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because now you really want to flesh it out.
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways to get there, but ultimately, with coaching, I think specifically, it's about being in a place where, or let's say advising or consulting, it's being in a place where you're willing to create that space and ask better questions rather than just jump in with the quote right answer, because there is no one right answer. The right
No.
answer depends on the
Right.
context.
Yeah, I think I'm happy that, I think maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just in my environment that I'm seeing a lot more that people are moving away from that prescriptive model, like prescribe me, this is what the solution is. And I think people are, at least in my circle, understand that that may not work for them. And they have to do some self-exploration in order to arrive to that conclusion, right? And even then, it's a test. Even then, you might see some spikes of like huge uh, success, and then it sort of kind of fades out. And then, you're realizing that you're going to need to not necessarily pivot, but you have to take your differentiation, whatever that is, and dial in, you know. And some people are still in the phase of embracing who they are. Like, I feel like I'm still embracing who I am.
As am
Do you?
I. As am I. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. All this stuff that I'm talking about, I'm not by any
Yeah.
stretch thinking that I've got this figured out completely. I just know
Yeah,
compared to where I was 10, 15, 20, 30 years
for
ago, I'm
sure.
52
Yeah.
now, like
Yeah.
it's just for me personally, night and day. That doesn't mean that I'm any further along than anybody else. And I'm still unpacking this. I'm still every day. It's a practice. It's like anything else.
It's
It's
a
like every day
practice.
I'm practicing this stuff, and it's
Yeah.
always evolving. And the same thing is with business, by the way. Success and failure is like, what does that mean ultimately? It's like if you're trying something new and it doesn't work right away, does that failure? No, it just means, you've
Right.
tried some stuff and it hasn't worked the way you hoped it would. It's not so much about like any one result. It's about, I think, again, personally, it's about how much you're living in integrity with those values. And this is something that I really learned reading that Ryan Bush book, specifically the Become Who You Are, which I can't recommend highly enough. It's really about like, he really studied like the Greeks and eudaimonia and Stoicism and Buddhism and all these different philosophies and kind of
Hmm.
unpacking it, and the idea that we want to live fully engaged lives. At least I do. I want to feel
Mm.
alive. Every morning I want
Hmm.
to feel alive, right?
Yes.
And ultimately, the external events that happen to us, a lot of them are, of course, beyond our control, but there's a lot of stuff we have control over. And what makes somebody's life, at least in this philosophy or these types of philosophies, isn't about that they have the house and they have the perfect job and the perfect spouse and perfect whatever. Because a lot of people have all that stuff and they're still miserable, right?
Yes.
And it's not
Yes.
that they don't have it. It's not that they never get there. Oh, that makes I'm a martyr, right? It's about like what are those virtues? What are those values that the things that they care about? Let's say honesty is one of them. Let's say hard work or creativity is a great one. That's definitely one of mine. If it's just like there's like a tapestry of these types of values, right? How much am I living in alignment with those every
Yes.
day,
Ooh, you just
right?
said my favorite word, alignment.
Alignment. Yeah.
Yes.
If I'm living in alignment with those every
Hmm.
day, and I
Hmm.
know what they are, first of all, and I have enough self-awareness to understand whether I'm living in alignment, like again, these all tie together, then even if I'm going through, which I've been going through a tough time recently, I've switched gears into a new
Sure.
area that did not work as well as I thought it would. Okay,
Mm. Right.
fine. Like
Yeah.
I'm living
You
that. I'm
tried
not
it
saying,
and you
yeah,
tested.
I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I gotta go. So I'm not saying this all from a position of like everything is perfect. But for me, living in alignment with that, there's this energy to it. There's this like enthusiasm, this eudaimonia, this kind of however you want to describe it. And that carries me through the day and carries me to keep learning and keep trying to improve and keep trying and not quitting. And I think that applies to your personal life. I think that applies to, your business. I can't imagine trying to be successful externally unless I felt this internal abundance. I can't create external abundance unless it's coming from something.
Mm.
And again, this is all a decade in the making, and it's something I have to read and learn and practice every single day. I've got cheat sheets, I've got books I read over and over. I'm not trying to make it seem like this is easy, but boy, is it worth it. Because now it's like when you're going through a hard time, and then
You
suddenly
can
something,
process it differently.
yeah, you
Yeah.
don't, and you realize, at least I realized that none of that is inherently about me. I think that was the biggest difference. And so going back to what I was saying before, if you're going into business, for people listening, if you're a trainer or coach or consultant, and you're going into this because you want people to validate your expertise and make you feel good about yourself. If you're going into it with that, and then somebody doesn't need what you have, or that you lose a client because they're upset,
Mm.
whatever it is,
Oh man.
how devastating is that versus if you're tapping into that, what's already there, and you're able to figure out how to do that, then you can go out there and you can express those things and you can create those things in the world. And yes, it still sucks to get rejected. It
Yeah.
still
Let's
sucks.
face it.
It
Yes.
still sucks. It still sucks to put effort in and not get a client that send a
Or
proposal.
ghosted by
Or
people
ghosted.
that, yes.
100%.
Hmm.
But it
Right.
sucks a lot less when you actually are like, this isn't about me. And I am the right fit for some people and not for others. Back to your point earlier.
Wow. Okay, can I just say that maybe you are the very first marketer who talked about mindfulness,
I'm
yoga,
the mindful marketer.
the mindful marketer. Yeah, like,
It's
is that your
Marcus, the mindful
tagline?
marketer.
Like,
Yes.
change your profile, Marcus. I mean,
Listen, there was a time where I thought I was going to be going in that direction specifically. And again, going back to what feels right for me,
yes,
that wasn't the direction. Doesn't mean it doesn't come in. It means that it's hopefully
yes.
it's expressed in ways that I don't have to like necessarily explicitly state it.
Say it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
expressed
you're,
in my presence, it's expressed in how I like to be with people. Um,
yeah.
but
Like,
that's,
people
you
have
know,
told me that why don't you call yourself a self-awareness coach or a personal development coach. But and I'm like, I don't, that's not what I that's not what I'm trying to do, you know. It's a it's a modality that I use through my consulting, my coaching practice, so we can have a better, not only better, but we have this unique product and we can own it. And let's face it, how many times, you know, when you had a thought or you had something you believed in so much, but you didn't really own it, you can't even sell it to yourself. How can you sell it to other people? Like, I don't
that's
see
a
how.
very practical question. If you can't, I like how you just said that. If you can't sell it to yourself, because now
Right.
you're getting to the root of everything we've been talking about. If you can't if you don't buy into it yourself about
Yeah.
your own value, how in the world are you going to feel comfortable enough going out there day after day talking to hundreds of people over 12 dozens or whatever it takes? How are you going to feel confident enough in your own abilities to go out there and with a straight face be able to say, this is my value? And this is what you see a
And
lot
this is
of
how
people
much it
do.
costs.
And
Like,
this is how much it costs. And this is what you see a lot of people struggle with. What
yeah.
do? They give it away for free or they undercharge and they think
Oh,
that's going
yeah.
to be the solution. It's like, okay, now we're getting into tactics, which unfortunately today we won't have time to go into too much, but
No.
it's the
Right.
foundation of everything. And it doesn't fix everything. It doesn't mean if you start getting this stuff dialed in, it doesn't mean everything's going to be easy. But there's
Of
going to be a
course.
meaning behind the struggle, right? There's going to be direction behind the struggle. There's going to be a sense of things. I'll leave it at this, and then I'll let you wrap us up. Um, Things that crushed me back in the day,
Mm,
crushed me.
mm,
Stupid stuff. I had a
mm,
when I started 20, 22 years or so when I started really doing professional marketing, and I did some outreach for copywriting, right?
mhm.
And I mistook the difference between principal and principal, like I put principal and I misspelled it. There's two common spellings. One is when you're the principal of a company or of over an, whatever. And this person wrote the most scathing email back to me about if I don't know the difference between those two words, then I have no business being a copywriter. Crushed me. I'm not exaggerating. Like
Wow.
to me, I could tell that story because I look at that and going, "What the heck was what? What was I thinking?" Yeah, it's never fun to get corrected by somebody and go, "Oh, but oh, yeah, okay, now I know." Like I've never made the mistake again. Actually, I did
Sure.
once, but that's a different story. But you know what
I
I'm
give you a
saying?
pass.
After
Yeah.
22 years, I
Right.
made one mistake with this
Right.
same thing. But it's like again, I'm saying all this from this is not just stuff I read in a book, and like, hey, here's
Yeah.
the way to
It's
dial it
from
in.
your raw experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's things now that I would have thought I would never be able to do. And it doesn't mean it doesn't take some strength,
Yeah.
but like, or
Yeah.
attention to do it. So there's all this stuff matters. And yeah, as
Yeah.
we wrap up, I wanted to give you a chance, just the last couple, 3 minutes. We
Yeah.
talked about a lot of stuff, right? If somebody's listening and going, that sounds interesting, a lot to process. Where do I start with this? What would be your advice, closing us out, last couple of minutes, of just the first step that you would recommend somebody taking to start going down in this crazy rabbit hole that we've been discussing.
Oh boy, this is this is the best way I can put it. Um, in the business world, right, we're all preaching something. Whatever it is that you're preaching, make sure you're practicing in alignment.
I think you nailed it.
That's pretty much it. Make sure you're practicing in alignment because I think oftentimes I see this even with, you know, executive or leadership coaches or, fractional consultants. And I looked, it's really, and I'll say it out. I think I can just do that. Why not? I'll just say it. I see what they are, and I think this is not intentional. This is subconscious, okay? They they're putting a persona out in the world, but when you actually speak to them, it doesn't match, it doesn't align. And I am the kind of person I will seek for feedback. Like, Mark, call me out on my bullshit. Thank you. You saved me. You saved me. And I love that. I will actually look for support, seek for support who can call me out on my bullshit. But it's necessarily not even bullshit. It's like I said, it's your level of self-awareness might not be there. And in order for us to become more uh ingrained or become more of who we are, I think we need to be more honest and say, you know what? I can't do this alone. Like you projected things to me today that I'm like, holy shit, I need to go back and do some homework.
Well,
Buy
great.
that book.
I
You know what
gave
I
you
mean?
homework.
No, I mean in a good way, right? Like, I'm nourished. Like it felt like there was a dry plant and the plant needed some watering, right? And you just poured some water right into it. And now I feel even more nourished. And I have this sense of like growth that I want to grow more, not in a selfish way, not in like, oh, give me some more, but growth in a matter where it's a more meaningful. You know what I mean? So that's what this conversation was to me.
Well,
So,
I really appreciate that because that's after I've been on the receiving end of these conversations, even if they're not with people face to face, but again in books and just whatever. And
right.
I think that's I'll leave it at this.
Yeah.
When you can tap into that part of you that is that authentic, quote unquote authentic, right? That integrity, it's suddenly it's you're playing a different game, right? Because yes, we all want to do well financially, and I care about that. And
Yeah,
I'm not
sure.
going to downplay it
Right.
anymore, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, there is a payoff that when you have these kinds of interactions with people, whether it's through coaching or a conversation on a podcast or just your friends or whatever it is, where you can have that kind of impact, and feel that you have that kind of positive impact on somebody. Yes, make the money, but boy, in my opinion, there's nothing more satisfying and rewarding than that.